What if I told you that one biblical book contains the most dramatic rise and fall story ever written? A tale where a barren woman's desperate prayer births a prophet, where a shepherd boy's faith topples giants, and where friendship transcends royal jealousy. Welcome to 1 Samuel, the book that changed everything. This isn't just ancient history. It's the pivotal moment when God's people demanded an earthly king, setting the stage for David's dynasty and ultimately the Messiah himself. From Hannah's tears to Saul's tragic end, from Samuel's divine calling to David's anointing, this book bridges Israel's chaotic past with its glorious future. Today, we're diving deep into 8 chapters that will reveal why 1 Samuel isn't just important to the Bible. It's the hinge upon which the entire Old Testament turns. Get ready to see familiar stories with fresh eyes and discover why this ancient drama still captivates hearts today. In the hills of Ephraim lived a man named Elkanah who had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah was barren. Every year they went up to worship at Shiloh, and every year Hannah suffered in silence. As chapter 1 verse 6 tells us, and her rival also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Peninnah took every opportunity to remind Hannah of her pain. During sacred meals, when there should have been peace, Hannah found only tears. Her husband Elkanah loved her deeply and tried to comfort her, asking, "Hannah, why weepest thou? And why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons?" But words couldn't fill the emptiness in her heart. One day after eating at Shiloh, Hannah couldn't bear it anymore. She rose with a broken soul and walked to the temple. Verse 10 describes her condition. "And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore." In her desperation, Hannah made a vow that would change everything. "O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but wilt give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head." Priest Eli watched her from afar. He saw her lips move without sound and thought she was drunk. He confronted her harshly, but Hannah responded with dignity, "No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord." Upon hearing this, Eli's heart softened. He gave her a blessing that Hannah treasured. "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him." Hannah returned home with renewed hope, and for the first time in a long while, she ate and was no longer sad. God heard Hannah's prayer. As chapter 1 verse 20 says, "Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about, after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord." When Samuel was weaned, Hannah kept her promise. She brought the child to the temple with generous offerings and told Eli, "O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord." Instead of crying over the separation, Hannah sang one of the most beautiful songs in the Bible. Her song in chapter 2 begins, "My heart rejoiceth in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation." Hannah had learned that God can transform any impossible situation into victory. While little Samuel grew up in the temple, something very different was happening with Eli's sons. Hophni and Phinehas were priests, but they acted like criminals. Verse 12 describes them bluntly. "Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord." These men stole meat from sacrifices before they were offered to God. They threatened people who came to worship. Even worse, as verse 22 reveals, now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. In the midst of this spiritual darkness, Samuel shone like a light. Verse 18 tells us, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen ephod." Every year, his mother Hannah brought him a new coat when she came with her family to offer sacrifices. God blessed Hannah for her faithfulness. Verse 21 says, "And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters, and the child Samuel grew before the Lord." Samuel had grown up in the temple under Eli's care. One night, when he was a young boy, something extraordinary happened. As chapter 3, verse 3 tells us, "And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep." That night, Samuel heard a voice calling his name. He thought it was Eli who needed him, so he ran to him saying, "Here am I, for thou callest me." But Eli told him he hadn't called and ordered him back to sleep. The voice called him a second time, and again Samuel ran to Eli. The old priest again told him he hadn't called. When this happened a third time, verse 8 explains, "And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child." Eli taught Samuel how to respond to God. "Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." Samuel returned to his place and waited. When God came and stood before him, Samuel responded as Eli had taught him. But the message he received was devastating. God revealed that he would punish Eli's house forever because of his son's sins. Verse 13 contains the exact words, "For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not." The next morning Samuel didn't want to tell Eli what God had said, but the old man insisted, "I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee." When Samuel told him everything, Eli accepted the judgment with resignation. "It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good." Years passed, and Samuel grew as a recognized prophet throughout Israel. But a moment of national crisis came when the Philistines attacked at Ebenezer. Chapter 4, verse 2 recounts, "And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men." The elders of Israel met in desperation. They decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, thinking this would give them automatic victory. It was superstition, not true faith. When the Ark arrived at the camp, all Israel shouted with such force that the earth shook. The Philistines were filled with fear when they heard the noise. They knew what the ark meant to Israel, but they decided to fight with even more determination, saying, "Be strong, and quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that ye be not servants unto the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men, and fight." The battle was a complete disaster for Israel. Verse 10 summarizes the tragedy, "And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. Worse still, Eli's sons died in battle, and the Philistines captured the ark of God. A man from Benjamin ran from the battle to Shiloh, with his clothes torn and dirt on his head, to bring the terrible news. When Eli, who was 98 years old and blind, heard that the ark had been captured, he fell backward from his chair, broke his neck, and died. That same day, Phinehas's wife gave birth to a son, and named him Ichabod, saying, "The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark had been taken." The Philistines took the ark as a trophy to Ashdod and placed it in Dagon's temple. But the next morning they found something disturbing. As chapter 5, verse 3 says, "And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again." The next day the situation got worse. "And when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold." God also sent painful tumors upon the people of Ashdod. Verse 6 explains, "But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them, and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereof." The Philistines sent the ark to Gath, but the same thing happened there. They sent it to Ekron, but the inhabitants cried out, "They have brought about the ark of the God of Israel to us, to slay us and our people." After 7 months of plagues, the Philistines consulted their priests and diviners about what to do. The answer was clear. They had to return the ark with golden offerings as acknowledgement of their guilt. They prepared a new cart with 2 cows that had never worn a yoke. They separated the cows from their calves and put them before the cart with the ark. If the cows went straight toward Israel without their young, they would know that Israel's God had caused all their calamities. Verse 12 describes what happened. "And the kine took the straight way to the way of Bethshemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left." It was a miracle. The mothers abandoned their calves to carry the ark back to Israel. When the ark arrived at Bethshemesh, the Israelites rejoiced greatly, but their curiosity cost them dearly. Some men looked inside the ark, and God struck them down. As chapter 6 verse 19 says, "And he smote the men of Bethshemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 70 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter." The people of Bethshemesh sent the ark to Kiriath-Jearim, where it remained in Abinadab's house. His son Eleazar was consecrated to guard it. There the ark stayed for 20 long years. During all this time, Israel mourned for the Lord. Samuel saw that the people were ready for real change. In chapter 7, verse 3, he addressed them with these words, "If ye do return unto the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only. And he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." The people responded with genuine repentance. They put away their idols and served only the Lord. Samuel called all Israel to Mizpah to pray and fast. There they confessed, "We have sinned against the Lord." But when the Philistines heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they came up to attack them. The Israelites were filled with terror and begged Samuel, "Cease not to cry unto the Lord our God for us, that he will save us out of the hand of the Philistines." Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it as a burnt offering to the Lord. While he prayed for Israel, the Philistines approached for battle. But then something extraordinary happened. Verse 10 describes it. "And as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day upon the Philistines, and discomfited them, and they were smitten before Israel." Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shen, calling it Ebenezer, saying, "Hitherto hath the Lord helped us." After this victory, the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israeli territory again during Samuel's time. As verse 13 says, "So the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel." Israel also recovered the cities the Philistines had taken from them, from Ekron to Gath. There was peace between Israel and the Amorites too. Samuel established a judicial system that worked wonderfully. Verse 16 explains, "And he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places." He was a traveling judge who made sure justice reached all the people. His home was at Ramah, and there he also judged Israel. He built an altar to the Lord in that place. During these years, Israel experienced peace, prosperity, and justice under Samuel's leadership. The people respected Samuel because they knew he was a man of God. His decisions were fair, his motivations were pure, and his private life matched his public ministry. Israel had found in Samuel the leader they needed, someone who governed them according to God's will. These were golden years for Israel. There was no corruption in government, no war with their neighbors, and worship of the Lord flourished in the land. Samuel had demonstrated that theocracy could work when there was a faithful leader who listened to God and served the people with integrity. Years passed, and Samuel grew old. Like any father, he wanted his sons to continue his work. He appointed Joel and Abijah as judges over Israel at Beersheba, but these men didn't follow their father's example. Chapter 8, verse 3 is clear. "And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment." The elders of Israel saw what was happening and became concerned. They gathered and went to see Samuel at Ramah. They told him something that broke his heart. "Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." This request wounded Samuel deeply. He felt rejected after years of faithful service, but when he prayed to the Lord, he received a different perspective. In verse 7, God told him, "Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them." God explained to Samuel that this was part of a pattern. Since he brought Israel out of Egypt, the people had forsaken God and served other gods. Now they were doing the same thing to Samuel. God ordered Samuel to listen to the people, but also to warn them clearly about the consequences. Samuel obeyed and told them everything the king would do. "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots." The warning continued. The king would take their daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He would take the best of their fields, vineyards, and olive groves to give to his officers. He would tax everything they had. Samuel ended his warning with somber words in verse 17. "He will take the 10th of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day." But the people refused to listen. Their response was firm, "Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles." Samuel heard all these words and repeated them to the Lord. The divine response was simple: "Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king." So Samuel sent all the Israelites to their homes, knowing that the time had come for a change that would forever transform his people's history. There was a man from the tribe of Benjamin named Kish, who had a son called Saul. Chapter 9, verse 2 describes him perfectly. "And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people." Despite his impressive appearance, Saul came from humble beginnings and had no idea that destiny was about to find him through the most ordinary circumstances. One day, Kish's donkeys wandered off and got lost. This might seem like a small problem, but in those days, donkeys were valuable property. Kish told his son, "Take now one of the servants with thee, and arise, go seek the asses." So Saul took a servant and began searching through the hills of Ephraim, through Shalisha, Shalim, and the land of Benjamin. But they couldn't find the donkeys anywhere. After days of searching, Saul became worried about his father. He told his servant, "Come and let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses and take thought for us." But the servant had an idea. He knew there was a man of God in the nearby city who was highly respected. "Behold now, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man. All that he saith cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither. Peradventure he can show us our way that we should go." What Saul didn't know was that God had already spoken to Samuel about him. The day before their meeting, chapter 9, verse 15 tells us, "Now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear a day before Saul came, saying, Tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines." When Samuel saw Saul approaching, God confirmed, "Behold the man whom I spake to thee of, this same shall reign over my people." Samuel invited Saul to eat with him and told him something amazing. "And as for thine asses that were lost 3 days ago, set not thy mind on them, for they are found. And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee and on all thy father's house?" Saul couldn't believe what he was hearing. He responded humbly, "Am not I a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin?" The next morning, Samuel took Saul privately and anointed him with oil. As recorded in chapter 10, verse 1, "Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance?" Samuel gave Saul 3 signs to confirm God's calling. Everything happened exactly as Samuel predicted, and when Saul met a group of prophets, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied with them. But the private anointing was just the beginning. Samuel called all Israel to Mizpah to publicly reveal God's chosen king. He reminded them, "And ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations. And ye have said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us." Then came the dramatic moment. Samuel brought the tribes forward, and the lot fell on Benjamin. When they brought the families of Benjamin, the lot fell on the family of Matri, and finally on Saul. But when they looked for Saul, he was nowhere to be found. They inquired of the Lord, and the answer was embarrassing. "Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff." They ran and brought him out, and when he stood among the people, he was taller than everyone else. Samuel declared, "See ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people." All the people shouted, "God save the king." However, not everyone was impressed. Chapter 10, verse 27 says, "But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace." Saul wisely chose not to respond to his critics, showing maturity that would serve him well. Soon, Saul's leadership was tested. Nahash the Ammonite besieged Jabesh Gilead and made a cruel offer to the inhabitants. According to chapter 11, verse 2, "And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel." The people of Jabesh Gilead asked for 7 days to find help. When the messengers reached Saul's hometown of Gibeah, the people wept when they heard the news. Saul was coming from the field behind his oxen when he heard the crying. "What aileth the people that they weep?" he asked. When they told him, verse 6 describes his reaction. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. Saul's response to the crisis was swift and decisive. He took his oxen and cut them into pieces, sending them throughout Israel with this message: "Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen." The fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out as one man. When Saul numbered them at Bezek, there were 300,000 men of Israel and 30,000 men of Judah. Saul sent messengers back to Jabesh Gilead with this promise: "Tomorrow, by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help." The next morning, Saul divided his army into 3 companies and attacked the Ammonites during the morning watch. Chapter 11, verse 11 records the complete victory. "And they slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together." After this victory, the people wanted to execute those who had questioned Saul's ability to save them, but Saul showed mercy. "There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel." Samuel then suggested they renew the kingdom at Gilgal, where all the people made Saul king before the Lord. At this ceremony, Samuel delivered his farewell address. He challenged the people in chapter 12, verse 3. "Behold, here I am, witness against me before the Lord, and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose ass have I taken, or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed, or of whose hand? Have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes therewith?" The people testified that Samuel had wronged no one and taken nothing from anyone. Samuel reminded them of God's faithfulness throughout their history and warned them about the consequences of wickedness. To demonstrate God's displeasure with their request for a king, Samuel called upon the Lord for thunder and rain during wheat harvest. Chapter 12, verse 17, records what happened. "Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king." The supernatural weather terrified the people, and they begged Samuel, "Pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not. For we have added unto all our sins this evil, to ask us a king." Samuel assured them that if they served the Lord faithfully, both they and their king would prosper, but if they did wickedly, they would be consumed. 2 years into Saul's reign, the Philistines became a serious threat again. Saul chose 3,000 men, keeping 2,000 with him at Michmash, while his son Jonathan commanded 1,000 at Gibeah. Jonathan's attack on a Philistine garrison triggered a massive response. Chapter 13, verse 5 describes the enemy force. "And the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude." The situation became desperate. The Israelites hid in caves, thickets, rocks, high places, and pits. Some even fled across the Jordan River. Saul waited at Gilgal for Samuel to come and offer sacrifices, but Samuel was delayed. As Saul watched his army scatter, he made a fatal decision. He offered the burnt offering himself, something only a priest should do. Just as Saul finished the sacrifice, Samuel arrived and confronted him. Saul tried to justify his actions. "Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore, and offered a burnt offering." Samuel's response was devastating. In chapter 13, verse 13, he declared, "Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people. Meanwhile, the Philistines sent raiding parties to terrorize Israel. They had also removed all the blacksmiths from the land, forcing Israelites to go to Philistine territory to sharpen their tools. On the day of battle, chapter 13, verse 22, reveals Israel's disadvantage. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but with Saul. And with Jonathan his son was there found. Jonathan decided to take action. Without telling his father, he and his armor-bearer approached the Philistine outpost. Jonathan said, "Come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few." His faith was rewarded. Chapter 14, verse 15 describes what happened. "And there was trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling." But Saul made another rash decision. He pronounced a curse, "Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies." Jonathan, who hadn't heard this oath, ate some honey he found in the forest. When Saul discovered this through casting lots, he was ready to execute his own son. Only the people's intervention saved Jonathan's life, declaring, "Shall Jonathan die, who hath wrought this great salvation in Israel? God forbid! As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he hath wrought with God this day." God gave Saul another opportunity to prove his obedience. Samuel came to him with a direct command from the Lord in chapter 15, verse 3. "Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." This was divine judgment on the Amalekites for their treatment of Israel during the Exodus from Egypt. Saul gathered a massive army of 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. He warned the Kenites to separate themselves from the Amalekites because of their past kindness to Israel. Then Saul attacked and defeated the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, but he didn't fully obey God's command. Chapter 15, verse 9 reveals Saul's partial obedience. "But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly." Saul convinced himself that keeping the best animals for sacrifice was acceptable, but God saw it as rebellion. The Lord spoke to Samuel that same night. "It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he is turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments." Samuel was grieved and cried to the Lord all night. When he went to meet Saul the next morning, he found that the king had set up a monument to himself at Carmel. When Samuel confronted Saul, the king insisted he had obeyed God completely. "Blessed be thou of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord." But Samuel asked the obvious question, "What meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Saul tried to shift blame to the people, claiming they kept the animals to sacrifice to God. Samuel, S. response was one of the most important statements in Scripture. In verse 22 he declared, "Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry." The judgment was final. Samuel told Saul, "Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king." When Saul grabbed Samuel's robe as he turned to leave, it tore. Samuel used this as a symbol. The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou. Samuel demanded that Agag be brought to him. The Amalekite king came confidently, thinking his life would be spared. But Samuel declared, As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel executed Agag before the Lord in Gilgal. After this, Samuel went to his home in Ramah, and Saul went to his house in Gibeah. Chapter 15, verse 35 records the sad end of their relationship. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul. But God wasn't finished with Samuel's ministry. The Lord asked him, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. Samuel was afraid, knowing that Saul would kill him if he discovered this mission. God told him to take a heifer and say he was going to sacrifice to the Lord. When Samuel arrived in Bethlehem, the elders were afraid and asked, Comest thou peaceably? Samuel assured them he came in peace to sacrifice to the Lord. He sanctified Jesse and his sons for the ceremony. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought surely this was God's chosen one. But the Lord corrected him in chapter 16, verse 7. Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Jesse brought 7 sons before Samuel, but God didn't choose any of them. Samuel asked, Are here all thy children? Jesse replied, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. Samuel insisted they wait for him. When David arrived, chapter 16, verse 12 describes him, And he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. The Lord told Samuel, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Samuel anointed David in the presence of his brothers. And from that day forward, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David powerfully. But verse 14 reveals what happened to Saul. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. Saul's servants noticed their master's distress and suggested a solution. They told him in chapter 16, verse 16, Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man, who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. Saul agreed to their plan. One of the servants recommended someone he knew. Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Saul sent messengers to Jesse asking for David to come serve him. Jesse sent David to Saul with gifts, a donkey loaded with bread, a bottle of wine, and a young goat. When David arrived, Saul loved him greatly and made him his armor-bearer. Saul sent word to Jesse, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And so began the ironic situation described in verse 23. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. The future king was now comforting the current king, though neither understood the full significance of this arrangement. David faithfully served Saul, bringing him peace through music while learning the ways of the royal court. This period prepared David for his future role while providing Saul with temporary relief from his torment. The Philistines gathered their armies for war and positioned themselves on a mountain on one side of the valley of Elah. Saul and the Israelites camped on the opposite mountain with the valley between them. From the Philistine camp came their champion, a giant named Goliath from Gath. Chapter 17, verse 4 describes his intimidating appearance. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. His armor was equally impressive. He wore a bronze helmet and a coat of mail weighing 5,000 shekels. His legs had bronze armor, and he carried a bronze javelin between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point weighed 600 shekels. A shield-bearer walked before him. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath issued his challenge. "Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us." All the men of Israel fled from him and were greatly afraid. During this standoff, Jesse sent David to bring food to his brothers and their captain. When David arrived and heard Goliath's challenge, he was outraged. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David's older brother Eliab accused him of pride and curiosity, but David persisted in asking about the reward for killing the giant. When Saul heard about David's interest, he summoned him. David told the king, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul pointed out the obvious problem. "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." But David had experience with dangerous situations. He told Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God." Saul agreed to let David fight, but first he dressed him in his own armor. David tried to walk, but couldn't because he wasn't used to the equipment. "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them," he told Saul. So David removed the armor and took his staff, chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's bag. With his sling in his hand, he approached the giant. When Goliath saw David, he was insulted. "Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves?" He cursed David by his gods and threatened to feed his flesh to the birds and beasts. But David responded with faith, "Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied." David ran toward Goliath, took a stone from his bag, slung it, and struck the giant in the forehead. The stone sank deep, and Goliath fell face down to the ground. Since David had no sword, he ran to Goliath, drew the giant's own sword, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled, and Israel pursued them with a great victory shout. After David's victory over Goliath, everything changed. Saul refused to let him return to his father's house. As chapter 18 verse 2 records, "And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house." David became a permanent member of the royal court, and Saul began giving him important military assignments. The remarkable thing about David was his perfect success rate. Chapter 18 verse 5 tells us, "And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants." No matter what mission Saul assigned, David completed it successfully. His wisdom in military matters impressed everyone, from common soldiers to high-ranking officers. During this time, David formed the most famous friendship in history with Saul's son Jonathan. The connection was immediate and deep. Chapter 18, verse 1 describes it beautifully. "And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. This wasn't just casual friendship. It was a covenant bond that would endure through every trial. Jonathan demonstrated his love in a powerful way. Verse 4 says, "And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle." By giving David his royal robe and weapons, Jonathan was symbolically transferring his claim to the throne. This act showed Jonathan's recognition that God had chosen David to be king. But David's success started to create problems. When the army returned from battle, the women came out to celebrate. Their song, recorded in verse 7, would change everything. "And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. The comparison was innocent enough, but it hit Saul like a knife to the heart. Saul's quota's reaction was immediate and dangerous. Verse 8 reveals his thoughts. "And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom?" From that day forward, Saul watched David with suspicion and growing hatred. Recognizing the danger, Saul tried to eliminate David through what seemed like an honor. He offered his daughter Merab as a wife, but then gave her to another man. Later, when Saul learned that his younger daughter Michal loved David, he saw an opportunity. He demanded an unusual bride price, 100 Philistine foreskins, hoping David would die in the attempt. But David exceeded expectations, bringing 200 foreskins and winning Michal's hand in marriage. Chapter 18, verse 29 shows the result. "And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually." Saul's jealousy quickly turned to open hostility. Chapter 19, verse 1 tells us, "And Saul spake to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David." The king was no longer hiding his intentions. He wanted David dead and expected his son and servants to help accomplish this goal. But Jonathan couldn't betray his friend. He warned David of the danger and then pleaded with his father. Jonathan reminded Saul of David's faithful service and the great victory God had given Israel through him. Chapter 19, verse 4 records his defense. "And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee ward very good." Jonathan's words temporarily calmed Saul's anger. The king even made an oath, "As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain." For a brief moment, it seemed like peace was possible. David returned to court and continued his military service, winning another great victory against the Philistines. But Saul's promise didn't last long. The evil spirit returned to torment him, and David was called to play his harp for relief. This time, instead of finding comfort in the music, Saul saw an opportunity for murder. Chapter 19, verse 10 describes the terrifying scene. "And Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall with the javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night." David ran home to his wife Michal, but safety was temporary. Saul sent messengers to watch David's house and kill him in the morning. Michal saw the danger and warned her husband. Chapter 19, verse 12 tells us, "So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped." To buy David more time, Michal created a clever deception. She took household idols and laid them in the bed, putting a pillow of goat's hair at the head and covering everything with clothes. When Saul's men came for David, she told them, "He is sick." But when they reported back to Saul, he ordered them to bring David in his bed so he could kill him personally. The deception was discovered when the messengers returned to find the image instead of David. Saul confronted his daughter angrily. "Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped?" Michal protected herself by lying. "He said unto me, Let me go. Why should I kill thee?" David's wife had chosen to save his life, even at the cost of deceiving her own father. David fled to Samuel at Ramah, knowing the old prophet would understand his situation. He poured out his heart to Samuel, asking the question that haunted him. "What have I done? What is mine iniquity, and what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life?" Samuel provided not just counsel, but also sanctuary in the prophetic community. Chapter 19, verse 18 tells us, "So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth." Naioth was a place where the prophets lived and studied together. It seemed like the perfect hiding place. Surely Saul wouldn't attack a religious community. But Saul's hatred had no boundaries. When he learned where David was hiding, he sent soldiers to capture him. However, God had other plans. Chapter 19, verse 20 describes what happened. "And Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied." The soldiers forgot their mission entirely. Instead of arresting David, they joined the prophets in spiritual worship. When they didn't return, Saul sent a second group of messengers. The same thing happened to them. He sent a third group with identical results. Each time, the Spirit of God overcame the soldiers and turned them into worshippers instead of warriors. Finally, Saul decided to handle the matter himself. He traveled to Ramah with murder in his heart, but God intervened again. Chapter 19, verse 23 records the extraordinary event. "And he went thither to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also, and he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah." What happened next was both miraculous and humiliating for Saul. Verse 24 tells us, "And he stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets?" The king who came to kill ended up helpless and exposed under the complete control of God's Spirit. This divine intervention gave David the time he needed to escape. It also sent a clear message that God was protecting his chosen servant. Saul's own men saw their king rendered powerless in the presence of the Almighty. No weapon formed against God's anointed would prosper. David knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed to understand if Saul's murderous intent was permanent or just a temporary fit of rage. He sought out Jonathan to devise a test that would reveal Saul's true heart. The plan centered on the new moon feast, a monthly celebration where David's presence would be expected. David proposed the test to his friend. "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even." If Saul asked about David's absence, Jonathan would say that David had requested permission to attend a family sacrifice in Bethlehem. Jonathan agreed to help, but he wanted to renew their covenant first. Chapter 20, verse 17, shows the depth of their friendship. "And Jonathan caused David to swear again, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul." They agreed on a signal system using arrows to communicate Saul's response. Without putting Jonathan in danger, the first day of the feast, Saul said nothing about David's empty chair. He assumed something had happened to make David ceremonially unclean. But on the second day, when David was still absent, Saul questioned, "Jonathan, wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today?" Jonathan gave the prepared answer about David visiting his family, but Saul's reaction was explosive. Chapter 20, verse 30, records his angry words. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? Saul continued his rant, revealing his true fears. For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. When Jonathan asked what David had done to deserve death, Saul threw a javelin at his own son, trying to kill him, just as he had tried to kill David. The next morning, Jonathan went to the field with a young boy to shoot the arrows as agreed. When he shot the arrows beyond where David was hiding, he called out the coded message, Is not the arrow beyond thee? Make speed, haste, stay not. This was the signal that David's life was in danger, and he must flee immediately. After the boy. Left with the arrows, David came out of hiding for one last farewell. Chapter 20, verse 41, describes the emotional scene. And as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times. And they kissed one another, and wept one with another until David exceeded. Jonathan's final words to his friend were both a blessing and a farewell. Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed, and thy seed forever. The 2 friends parted, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. David was now truly alone, fleeing for his life with nothing but the clothes on his back. He desperately needed food and weapons, so he went to Nob, where the tabernacle was located. The high priest Ahimelech came out to meet him, but he was troubled by David's appearance. Chapter 21, verse 1 records his concern. Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? David couldn't tell the truth without putting the priest in danger, so he created a cover story. He claimed to be on a secret mission for the king. The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. David asked for food, and Ahimelech explained that he only had holy bread, the showbread that was normally reserved for priests. But he was willing to give it to David if his men were ceremonially clean. Chapter 21, verse 6 tells us, So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the shewbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. David also asked for weapons, explaining that his urgent mission had prevented him from bringing his own sword. Ahimelech offered him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest. In the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. David gladly took the weapon that had belonged to his famous enemy, unknown to David and Ahimelech. Their conversation had a witness. Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd, was detained at the tabernacle that day for ritual purification. Chapter 21, verse 7 mentions his presence. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. This seemingly minor detail would have deadly consequences. Doeg observed everything: David's arrival, his request for food and weapons, and the priest's generous response. He would remember every detail, and soon this information would reach Saul's ears. After leaving Nob, David realized he was still in great danger. Even with food and weapons, he was outnumbered and alone. In desperation, he fled to Gath, the Philistine, city where Goliath had lived. But the servants of Achish the king recognized him. Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one of another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Realizing his mistake, David pretended to be insane to escape. He acted like a madman, scribbling on doors and letting spit run down his beard. Achish was disgusted and told his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad, wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? David escaped from Gath and found refuge in the cave of Adullam. Word spread that he was there, and soon he was joined by others who were in distress. Chapter 22, verse 2 describes his growing band. And everyone that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented gathered themselves unto him. And he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. Back in Gibeah, Saul sat under a tree holding his spear, surrounded by his officials. His paranoia had reached new levels, and he accused all his servants of conspiracy. Chapter 22, verse 7 records his bitter words. And Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? Saul continued his accusations, that all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as at this day. This was when Doeg the Edomite saw his opportunity. He stepped forward with the information he had gathered at Nob. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Saul immediately summoned Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob. When they arrived, he accused them of treason. Why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me, to lie in wait as at this day? Ahimelech tried to defend himself, pointing out David's loyal service. And who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thine house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me, let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. But Saul was beyond reason. He pronounced a death sentence. Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. When he ordered his guards to kill the priests, they refused. Chapter 22, verse 17 explains, And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, Turn, and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. Since his own men wouldn't commit this atrocity, Saul turned to Doeg, Turn thou and fall upon the priests. Doeg obeyed without hesitation. Verse 18 records the massacre. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. The slaughter didn't stop with the priests. Saul ordered the complete destruction of Nob, the city of priests. Chapter 22, verse 19, describes the horror. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. Only one man escaped the massacre, Abiathar, son of Ahimelech. He fled to David and brought the devastating news. When David heard what had happened, he was filled with guilt and sorrow. Verse 22 records his response. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. David promised Abiathar protection and invited him to stay. Abide thou with me, fear not. For he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. The sole survivor of Nob's priesthood found refuge with the man whose visit had triggered the tragedy. While hiding with his men, David received disturbing news. The Philistines were attacking Keilah, a fortified city in Judah, and robbing the threshing floors where grain was stored. David faced a difficult decision. Should he risk exposure to help his fellow Israelites, or stay hidden for his own safety? David consulted the Lord through Abiathar's ephod, asking, Shall I go and smite these Philistines? The divine answer was clear. Go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men were afraid. They pointed out the obvious danger in chapter 23, verse 3. And David's men said unto him, Behold, we be afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? David inquired of the Lord again, and God gave him a specific promise. Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand. Encouraged by this divine assurance, David and his men attacked the Philistines. Chapter 23, verse 5, records their complete victory. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their cattle and smote them with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. When Saul heard that David had entered a walled city, he was delighted. He saw this as an opportunity to trap his enemy. And Saul said, God hath delivered him into mine hand, for he is shut in by entering into a town that hath gates and bars. Saul called all his forces to war, planning to besiege Keilah and capture David. But David learned of Saul's plan and realized his dangerous position. He asked God two crucial questions through the ephod. Would Saul come to Keilah, and would the citizens surrender him to save themselves? Both answers were yes. Chapter 23, verse 12 records God's warning. Then said David, Will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, They will deliver thee up. Faced with this betrayal by the very people he had saved, David and his men immediately left Keilah. They had grown to about 600 men, and they moved constantly to avoid capture. Chapter 23, verse 13, describes their nomadic existence. Then David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and went whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped out of Keilah, and he forbare to go forth. David found temporary refuge in the wilderness strongholds of Ziph. Despite the constant danger, he received an unexpected visit from Jonathan. Saul's son found David in the woods and encouraged him with these words, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee, and that also Saul my father knoweth. They renewed their covenant before God, and Jonathan returned home. But even in this remote area, David wasn't safe from betrayal. The Ziphites went to Saul with information about David's location. Doth not David hide himself with us in strongholds in the wood, in the hill of Hachilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? They promised to deliver David into Saul's hands, and Saul blessed them for their loyalty to him. The chase continued relentlessly. Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to hunt David in the wilderness of En-Gedi, a rugged area near the Dead Sea, filled with caves and rocky hiding places. Chapter 24, verse 2 tells us, Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. During the pursuit, Saul entered a cave to relieve himself, not knowing that David and his men were hiding in the back of that very same cave. It was an incredible moment. the hunted and the hunter in the same place, with Saul completely vulnerable and unaware of the danger. David quotes men saw this as divine intervention. They whispered to their leader, "Behold the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee." This seemed like the perfect opportunity to end the persecution and claim the throne that God had promised. But instead of killing Saul, David quietly crept forward and cut off a piece of the king's robe. Even this small act troubled his conscience. Chapter 24, verse 5, reveals his inner conflict. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. David refused to let his men attack the king, telling them, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." Even though Saul was trying to kill him, David still respected the office, and the man whom God had chosen as king. After Saul left the cave, David followed him out and called to him, "My lord, the king." When Saul turned around, David bowed with his face to the ground in respect. He then asked the question that had been burning in his heart. "Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt?" David showed Saul the piece of cloth he had cut from the royal robe, proving how easily he could have killed the king. "Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe, and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee. Yet thou huntest my soul to take it." David's speech was both a defense and an appeal. He pointed out that he had never harmed Saul and questioned why the king was chasing him. "After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea?" He called on God to be the judge between them and to deliver him from Saul's persecution. Saul was deeply moved by David's mercy and his respectful words. Chapter 24, verse 16 records his emotional response. "And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil." Saul acknowledged that David could have killed him and chose not to. "For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for that thou hast done unto me this day." The king even admitted his knowledge of David's destiny. "And now, behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand." Saul made one final request, that David would spare his family when he became king. David swore an oath to grant this request. Then Saul took his army and went home, while David and his men returned to their stronghold. The confrontation had ended peacefully, but both men knew the conflict was far from over. The news that shook all Israel came suddenly. Samuel was dead. Chapter 25, verse 1 records the nation's grief. "And Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him, and buried him in his house at Ramah." The last judge, the prophet who had anointed both Saul and David, was gone. His death marked the end of an era and left Israel without their spiritual father. David moved his men to the wilderness of Paran, continuing his fugitive life. In this barren region, he encountered a wealthy man named Nabal, who owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Nabal lived in Maon but did business in Carmel. His wife Abigail was beautiful and intelligent, but Nabal himself was harsh and evil in his dealings. During sheep shearing time, a season of celebration and generosity, David sent 10 young men to Nabal with a polite request. David's message was respectful. Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them, all the while they were in Carmel. David's men had served as unpaid bodyguards for Nabal's shepherds, protecting them from bandits and wild animals. Now, during the prosperity of harvest time, David hoped for some provisions in return. His request was reasonable. Wherefore, let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants and to thy son David. But Nabal's response was insulting and foolish. Chapter 25, verse 10 records his arrogant words. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every one from his master. He refused to give anything and sent David's men away empty-handed. When David heard Nabal's response, his anger burned hot. He told his men, Gird ye on every man his sword. 400 armed men prepared to ride with David to destroy Nabal and every male in his household. David's fury was understandable, but his planned revenge would have been a terrible mistake. Fortunately, one of Nabal's servants ran to tell Abigail what had happened. The servant explained how David's men had been like a wall of protection around them, but the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. He warned Abigail that evil was coming upon their household because of her husband's foolishness. Abigail acted quickly and wisely. Without telling Nabal, she gathered generous provisions, 200 loaves of bread, 2 bottles of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of parched corn, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded everything on donkeys and went to meet David. When Abigail saw David, she fell at his feet and took all the blame upon herself. Upon me, my lord, upon me, let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. She begged David not to shed innocent blood, and reminded him that God would establish his house forever. Her wise words turned away David's wrath. David blessed God for sending Abigail and praised her good advice. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me, and blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. He accepted her gifts and sent her home in peace. When Abigail returned, Nabal was drunk from celebrating. She waited until morning to tell him what had happened. Chapter 25, verse 37 describes his reaction. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. 10 days later the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he blessed God for taking revenge without requiring David to sin. He quickly sent messengers to propose marriage to Abigail, and she accepted. Chapter 25. Verse 42 tells us, And Abigail hasted and arose, and rode upon an ass, with 5 damsels of hers that went after her, and she went after the messengers of David, and became his wife. The Ziphites came to Saul again with information about David's location. They told him, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? Once more Saul took 3,000 chosen men and went into the wilderness to hunt David. He made his camp on the hill of Hachilah by the road. David learned of Saul's approach and sent spies to confirm the king's exact location. When night fell, David asked for a volunteer to go with him into Saul's camp. Abishai, David's nephew and one of his mighty men, eagerly volunteered, I will go down with thee. Chapter 26, verse 7, describes what they found. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster, but Abner and the people lay round about him. The entire camp was in deep sleep, a supernatural slumber sent by God to protect David. Abishai saw this as a divine opportunity, and whispered to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now, therefore, let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. With one thrust of Saul's own spear, all of David's troubles could end. But David refused to harm God's anointed king. He said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. Instead of violence, David chose a different plan. He told Abishai, But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go. They took Saul's spear and water jug, then quietly left the camp. No one woke up or even stirred because of the deep sleep God had sent. David climbed to the top of a nearby hill where he would be safe but could still be heard. He called out loudly to the army and specifically to Abner, Saul's commander, Art not thou a valiant man? And who is like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept thy lord the king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy lord. David showed them the spear and water jug he had taken. And now, see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. This proved how easily he could have killed Saul, but chose not to. Abner had no answer for this failure in his duty to protect the king. When Saul recognized David's voice, he called out, Is this thy voice, my son David? David responded with respect, but also with pointed questions. Wherefore doth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in mine hand? He suggested that if God had stirred up Saul against him, then let God receive an offering, but if men were responsible, let them be cursed. David S words touched Saul's heart. Chapter 26, verse 21, records the king's repentant response. Then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. Saul asked David to return, but David kept his distance. He offered to send back the king's spear with one of his young men. David declared his faith that God would reward every man's righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. Saul blessed David before departing. Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail. Then Saul went his way, and David went his way. Both men seemed to understand that this might be their final encounter. Despite Saul's promises, David knew the king's repentance wouldn't last. Chapter 27, verse 1 reveals David's thoughts. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines, and Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. David made a desperate decision. He would flee to Israel's enemies for protection. He took his 600 men and their families and went to Achish, king of Gath. This was the same Achish before whom David had pretended to be mad years earlier. But now David came as a defector, seeking permanent asylum. The plan worked perfectly. Chapter 27, verse 4 says, And it was told Saul that David was fled to Gath, and he sought no more again for him. Saul stopped his pursuit, believing David was now beyond his reach and had become a traitor to Israel. Achish welcomed David warmly. When David requested a place to live outside the royal city, Achish gave him the town of Ziklag. Chapter 27 verse 6 tells us, Then Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. This became David's base of operations for 16 months. From Ziklag, David conducted raids against Israel's traditional enemies, the Geshurites, Gezrites, and Amalekites. But he told Achish he was raiding against Judah and allied tribes. Chapter 27 verse 10 shows his deception. And Achish said, Whither have ye made a road today? And David said, Against the south of Judah, and against the south of the Jerahmeelites, and against the south of the Kenites. To maintain his cover story, David left no survivors who could contradict his lies. And David saved neither man nor woman alive to bring tidings to Gath, saying, Lest they should tell on us, saying, So did David, and so will be his manner all, the while he dwelleth in the country of the Philistines. This deception was necessary for survival, but morally troubling. Achish completely trusted David's false reports. Chapter 27 verse 12 reveals the king's thinking. And Achish believed David, saying, He hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor, and him, therefore he shall be my servant forever. Achish was convinced that David had burned his bridges and would serve Philistia permanently. This dangerous game continued for over a year. David successfully convinced the Philistines he was their ally, while actually fighting their enemies and protecting Israel's borders. But this double life would soon become impossible to maintain when the Philistines decided to launch a major war against Israel. Chapter 28. Verse 1 describes the crisis that would end David's masquerade. And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. David found himself trapped in an impossible situation. When Achish told him to prepare for war against Israel, David gave a non-committal response. Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. Achish was pleased and promised to make David his permanent bodyguard. Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. The Philistine armies gathered at Aphek, while Israel camped by a fountain in Jezreel. As the Philistine troops marched in their formations, the other Philistine commanders noticed David and his men. Chapter 29 verse 3 records their concern. Then said the princes of the Philistines, What do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, Is not this David, the servant of Saul the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years? And I have found no fault in him, since he fell unto me unto this day. But the commanders weren't convinced. They angrily told Achish, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? They remembered the old song about David. Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Despite Achish's protests about David's loyalty, the commanders were firm. They wouldn't risk having a potential traitor in their ranks during such an important battle. Achish had to break the bad news to David. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning, and have light, depart. David pretended to be disappointed, maintaining his cover to the end. But what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant, so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Achish reassured him of his trust, but explained that the other commanders had made the decision final. So David and his men rose early and returned to Ziklag, while the Philistines continued to Jezreel for their fateful battle with Saul. God had delivered David from an impossible situation through the suspicions of his enemies. He wouldn't have to fight against his own people or reveal his true loyalties. But when David reached Ziklag, he discovered a new crisis. Chapter 30, verse 1 tells the story. And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag, and smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women, captives, that were therein. They took not away any, either small or great, but carried them away and went on their way. David's own city had been destroyed, and all the families taken captive, including David's 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. His men were so grief-stricken that they talked about stoning David. But chapter 30, verse 6 shows David's response. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. David consulted God through Abiathar the priest. Shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? The Lord answered, Pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. David immediately set out with his 600 men to rescue their families at the brook Besor. 200 men were too exhausted to continue, so David left them with the supplies and pressed on with 400 men. They found an Egyptian slave who had been abandoned by his Amalekite masters and was near death. After David fed and revived him, the man agreed to lead them to the Amalekite camp. Chapter 30, verse 16 describes what they found. And when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. The raiders were celebrating their success, completely unprepared for attack. David struck from twilight until evening of the next day. Only 400 young men escaped on camels. David recovered everything, all the people, livestock, and goods that had been taken. Chapter 30, verse 19, emphasizes the complete victory. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered. While David was rescuing his family from the Amalekites, Saul was facing his greatest crisis. The Philistine army gathered at Shunem, and Saul positioned his forces on Mount Gilboa. Chapter 28, verse 5, describes Saul's terror. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. In his desperation, Saul tried to consult God through all the normal channels. He looked for dreams, asked the priests for guidance through the Urim, and called upon the prophets. But chapter 28, verse 6 reveals God's silence. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Faced with divine silence, Saul made a shocking decision. He told his servants, "Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her, and inquire of her." This was the same Saul who had banned witches and mediums from Israel according to God's law. Now, in his desperation, he was ready to consult the very practices he had once condemned. His servants knew of a witch in Endor. So Saul disguised himself and went to her by night with 2 companions. When he asked her to call up a spirit, she was afraid. "Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die?" Saul swore an oath that no punishment would come upon her, so she agreed to help. When she asked whom to bring up, Saul said, "Bring me up Samuel." The witch began her ritual, but suddenly she cried out in terror. Something unexpected was happening. This wasn't her usual demonic deception. Chapter 28, verse 12 describes her shock. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. God had allowed Samuel's actual spirit to appear, bypassing the witch's fake powers and terrifying her. When Saul asked what she saw, the witch described, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. Saul knew this was Samuel and bowed his face to the ground in respect and fear. Samuel, quote, S spirit was not pleased to be disturbed. He asked Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? Saul poured out his desperation. I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. But Samuel had no comfort to offer. Chapter 28, verse 16 contains his harsh response. Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy, and the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me? For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. Samuel reminded Saul why God had rejected him, because thou obeyedst not the voice of the Lord, nor executedst his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. The prophet then delivered the final devastating prophecy. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Saul collapsed in terror. He had eaten nothing all day and all night, and Samuel's words drained whatever strength remained. The witch and his servants had to force him to eat bread and meat to give him strength for the journey back to his army. Saul returned to face a battle he now knew he would lose. The morning of the final battle dawned with both armies in position. The Philistines had gathered their full force and positioned themselves strategically. Chapter 29, verse 11 had mentioned their movement to Jezreel, and now they prepared for the decisive confrontation that would determine Israel's future. Saul knew what the outcome would be. Samuel's prophecy from the night before rang in his ears, Tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The king, who had started his reign with such promise, now faced his final hours, knowing that defeat and death awaited. The Philistines had every advantage. Their army was larger, better equipped, and positioned on better ground. They had iron weapons, while many Israelites still fought with bronze and inferior arms. Most importantly, they fought with confidence, while Israel's army was already demoralized by their king's obvious fear. Chapter 31, verse 1 sets the scene for the battle. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. From the very beginning, the battle went badly for Israel. The prediction was coming true exactly as Samuel had foretold. The Philistines pursued the fleeing Israelites and focused their attack on Saul and his sons. Chapter 31, verse 2 describes the targeted assault, and the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, Saul's sons. One by one, the royal princes fell in battle. Jonathan, quote, death was particularly tragic. This was the man who had loved David as his own soul, who had saved David's life multiple times, who had chosen friendship over his own claim to the throne. The greatest friendship story in the Bible ended on the slopes of Mount Gilboa, as Jonathan died fighting beside his father. The battle grew fiercer around Saul himself. Chapter 31, verse 3 tells us, And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. The king was badly hurt, but still alive, trapped in the midst of his enemies with no hope of escape. As the Philistines closed in for the capture, Saul made his final decision. He didn't want to be taken alive and tortured or humiliated by Israel's enemies. He called to his armor-bearer, "Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was too afraid to kill the king, so Saul took matters into his own hands. Chapter 31, verse 4, records his final act. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with his master. The rout of Israel's army was complete and devastating. Chapter 31, verse 7, describes the aftermath. "And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them." The Philistine victory was so thorough that Israelites abandoned their towns and fled across the Jordan River. The enemy occupied the very heart of Israel's territory, something that hadn't happened since the dark days of the Judges. In one day, all of Saul's military achievements were undone. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they made a discovery that filled them with joy. Chapter 31, verse 8 tells us, "And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. Their greatest enemies were dead on the battlefield. The Philistines treated Saul's body with deliberate dishonor. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, sending messengers throughout their land to proclaim the good news in their temples and to their people." Chapter 31, verse 10 describes the ultimate humiliation. "And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan." Bethshan was a strategic city that controlled the Jordan Valley. By displaying Saul's body on the city walls, the Philistines were making a public statement about their victory over Israel and their God's triumph over the God of Israel. The bodies of Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua were also hung on the walls as trophies of war. This public display of the royal corpses was not just military victory, but religious humiliation. In ancient Near Eastern thinking, the defeat of a king meant the defeat of his God. The Philistines wanted everyone to see that their deities had proven stronger than the Lord God of Israel. The sight of those bodies hanging on Bethshan's walls would have been visible to travelers from far away. Every Israelite who saw them would be reminded of their nation's defeat and their God's apparent abandonment. It was psychological warfare designed to crush Israel's spirit completely. But one group of Israelites refused to accept this humiliation. The men of Jabesh-Gilead remembered how Saul had saved their city at the beginning of his reign, when Nahash the Ammonite had threatened to gouge out their right eyes. They owed their lives and freedom to Saul's first great victory. When the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul and his sons, they decided to take action. Chapter 31, verse 11 says, "And when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, they couldn't allow their deliverer to remain dishonored on enemy walls. All the valiant men of the city prepared for a dangerous night mission." Chapter 31, verse 12 describes their courage. "All the valiant men arose and went all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there." They risked their lives to rescue the royal corpses from public shame. The men of Jabesh-Gilead traveled through enemy territory in darkness, scaled the walls of Bethshan, and took down the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons. This was an act of incredible bravery that could have cost them their lives if they had been caught by Philistine guards. Back in Jabesh Gilead, they burned the bodies according to their custom, then buried the bones under a tree. Chapter 31, verse 13 completes the story. And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. They mourned properly for the king who had once been their savior. This act of loyalty and courage provided a fitting end to Saul's troubled reign. Though he had failed as a king and died by his own hand, the men of Jabesh Gilead remembered his early heroism and honored him in death. Their gratitude outlasted his failures and gave him a measure of dignity in his final rest. The kingdom that had begun with such hope was now finished. Saul's dynasty had ended in a single day on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines controlled Israel's territory. The royal family was dead, and the nation was scattered. But somewhere in the wilderness, David was still alive, still anointed, still waiting for God's timing. The book of 1 Samuel ends with burial and mourning, but also with the promise of new beginning. Saul's failure had cleared the way for David's rise. The kingdom would continue, but under a different king, one who was truly after God's own heart. The tragic end of Israel's first royal dynasty was also the necessary preparation for its greatest. King Israel, quote, "As monarchy had survived its first crisis. Though Saul had fallen, the office of king would continue." David's time was coming, and with it, the golden age that would fulfill all of God's promises to his people. The end of one reign was the beginning of another, and God's plan would move forward despite human failure. If this deep dive into 1 Samuel has opened your eyes to the incredible richness of God's word, I want to ask you to do 3 simple things. First, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. When you subscribe, you're joining a community of people who are passionate about discovering the Bible's amazing stories in fresh, engaging ways. You'll never miss our latest biblical adventures, and you'll be part of something bigger than yourself. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear these powerful stories. Maybe it's a friend who's going through a difficult time like David did, or someone who needs to understand that God can use anyone, even a simple shepherd boy, to do extraordinary things. Your share could be exactly what someone needs to encounter God's truth in a powerful new way. Finally, leave a comment below and tell me which part of 1 Samuel impacted you the most. Was it Hannah's faith, Samuel's calling, Jonathan's friendship, David's mercy, Saul's tragic fall? I read every single comment, and your insights help make our community stronger. Remember, the story doesn't end here. David's greatest adventures are still ahead, and we'll be exploring them together in future videos. The shepherd boy who trusted God with a sling and stone is about to become the greatest king in Israel's history. Until next time, keep diving deep into God's word. Keep growing in faith, and keep discovering that the Bible is far more exciting than you ever imagined. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.